This is Cold Start.
It was really fun talking about your racing history and your disqualification, although that might not have been a fun memory.
I was going to say it was fun talking about a not so fun topic, but still an interesting story at the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of racing is the stories, right? The places we go, the kinds of cars we drive, the things that happen, those moments, those memories. That's kind of all part of this.
So now it's your turn for today's episode of Checkered Past, maybe telling how you got into racing and how you found yourself into your beginning career, if we want to call it that, career within motorsports and racing wheel to wheel.
You know, it's weird because I didn't grow up with motorsports. It was never even a seed in my mind that I would ever go race cars or anything for that matter. I played baseball as a kid. I was a band nerd. Going fast in a car was a fun thing to do, but it wasn't something I thought of as sort of sport or activity. I didn't even really watch it at home. So little by little over time, I started doing better in my career and getting nicer and nicer cars and mostly trying to avoid getting a ticket on the freeway half the time because these things are getting really fast. Friends of mine would say, hey, you need to go to the track. You know, track is the right place to go do that. It'll help you get it out of your system or you'll learn at least the right techniques to be safe. So I said, all right, I'll finally do it. It was in the summer of 2016, I started looking into track days, and I had just gotten earlier that year, or at late 2015, Porsche Cayman GT4, which was their new model, the 981 that had just come out. I'd been driving it as a street car. It'd been a lot of fun, but I was ready to go try to push it. So I looked for an event, went on Motorsport Reg, and I found that the local Porsche Club of America, PCA group in the Golden Gate region was going to be running a track day at Thunderhill Raceway. That's Thunderhill East, which is sort of the default. And I said, okay, here's my chance. I can finally go there. It looks like a fairly, beginner level friendly kind of an event. I can go and show up with my car and it'll be a good time. So I signed up for it, and it was in July of 2016 that literally I, for the first time in my entire life, stepped foot on a racetrack or even in a paddock. So I drove up to Thunderhill, drove for the couple of days, and I had a right seat instructor from Porsche Club who would give me some pointers, and I had a spin, and I had collected a bunch of dirt in the intake on the side of the car and learned the dynamics a little bit, but it was a good time. And that was the beginning of it. And on the drive home, I recognized that that switch had flipped in my mind. It went from, here's the thing I think I might want to try to do, to something I can't not do again. So as soon as I was home, I was back on Motorsport Reg looking for more events to try to figure out where I could go next. And a lot of friends had sort of warned me about Sonoma Raceway, that it was a really scary place, that it had a lot of hard walls. Somebody I heard even call it the Concrete Canyon. I've never heard anybody else call it that in my life.
I've never heard that term either.
Isn't that weird, right? Maybe there's some other place that calls themselves that. This place doesn't. And he was the only person I ever heard call it that. So I signed up for a few more days at Thunderhill, and along the way, like all of us, we just barely start to get some confidence and get a little faster and start pushing a little bit. On track, it was a mixed group, this event that I went to, and it was all different kinds of cars, and I'm by far the novice who was out there. And I was at Thunderhill coming into turn 6, and I noticed in my rear view, and it has been in my rear view for a while, this Ferrari Challenge car. And that was about as exotic as anything I knew. I wasn't really into those cars. It just looked fast. And so it really spooked me. So coming into turn 6, I went offline, which is the thing they tell you as a novice, never do. Don't go offline. If there's a faster car, they'll figure out how to get around you. Well, I went offline to let them pass, and I went a little bit too far outside the exit curbing at turn 6. There's a little rut, like there's dirt, and then the exit curbing, and then dirt. Well, I managed to get my tire right before the beginning of the exit curbing in a dirt rut, and the angle and the position of it hit just right, or which is to say, just wrong. And as I got back on the gas, I hear this grinding sound, this grrr, grrr. Wow, that doesn't sound right. What's going on? And as I'm driving around the rest of this lap, I realize something's really wrong with my car. So I pull over into the paddock, and I realize that my frunk, the front hood, this is a mid-engine car, so there's no engine up front. The frunk is sort of like pushed up on one side. So I get out of the car to look over, and I see a red coil, like the part of my coilover. And I realized what happened was I thrashed the shock tower. I literally sheared the housing of the shock tower, which was aluminum, with the strut itself. It shot up through the tower housing, and now there was this mangled piece of aluminum with the shock sticking up through it. Well, my day was over, and I didn't know what happened, and it was a pretty traumatic experience. By this point, I'd been signing up for a bunch of more track days and now really bummed that I ruined my car, and what am I going to do? So around that same time, I'd actually been thinking about maybe I should get something different for bringing to the track, and now my track car is disabled. And so I don't know what I'm going to do about it. And looking locally, fortunately enough, I found a local car that sort of met my criteria and what I was looking for. And so I bought it in anticipation of the fact that I had all these other track days lined up, and I'll use this car and it'll be cool. It'll be two different dynamics, a rear engine car and a mid engine car. Let's go. It was the first track day I went to in this new car. It was a 997 GT3.
Ooh, nice. Upgrading from the GT4 to the GT3.
Yeah, I was super stoked. It was a high mile car, but it had obviously been pretty well taken care of. It hadn't looked like it had much track use. So I brought this thing out, and it was now an event at Thunderhill West, which I'd never driven before. And I figured, like, why not? Go learn that one. And I had already made an appointment, knowing the history of the 997s, that the coolant lines tend to have problems. And there's this procedure you can have done, which is called pinning the coolant lines, where they attach this fastener around the coolant lines to keep them connected. Some people weld them, but this approach was pinning. And I had the appointment in a couple of weeks, but I figured, let me go take one day out and give it a try, and then I'll go get my coolant lines pinned and it'll be protected. Well, not even halfway through this track day, I'm on the straight on Thunderhill West, and suddenly there's this thing in my rearview mirror. I can't quite see what it is, and it looks like smoke. And then I realize there's a lot of smoke coming from the back of my car as I'm driving now. And as I turn into the first turn just past the straightaway at Thunderhill West, I do a full 180. The car just comes around, and I didn't know what was going on, and smoke is pouring out of the back. I see all the other cars around me had a lot better awareness than I did. They had their hands up. They could see something was coming out of the back of my car. They got offline. They didn't want to drive through it. And my car stopped. So I pull into the paddock, and I realize what had happened was my coolant lines exploded. There was fluid all over the back of the car. I left a big long trail on the racetrack that had to be addressed. And I was so embarrassed because I could have known this might happen. I'm the new guy on track. I get out there and kind of ruin the session for everybody. I just didn't know what the protocol was. So I felt so bad. I went to the organizer and I apologized, and I offered to pay for the cleanup and all this stuff. And I guess nobody had ever done that before. He was really surprised by that, but I just felt like I had to atone for my sin here. I had to make up for my failure. So that was my second toe of shame back from Thunderhill. At which point I said, I might want to learn how to do this properly. And I heard about this racing school that's at Sonoma Raceway. I'm a little afraid of that, but I thought in a school context, I could go about it the right way. So I signed up for a program with the company or the school called Sim Raceway. And it was a weird name, Sim Raceway. I'm like, is it real? Is it simulated? Turns out they had their own iRacing-like sim racing title that they released. They had their own platform, but it had just since folded, but they kept the name of the school in alignment with that, so Sim Raceway. So I signed up for the Sim Raceway school for what they called Performance Driving 1, 2, and 3, which is you bring your street car, they teach you the line at Sonoma, they teach you driving techniques, and if you pass what they called PD3, you're basically cleared to go do lapping days with their group. So I went and did that, and I had a blast. I went out in the GT3, which had since had its coolant lines pinned. Thank you, SharkWorks. And I had a great time. I learned the line at Sonoma. I did lead follow, learned from the people who had more experience than I did. We were out there with a weird hodgepodge of cars, and it was just the most amazing time I ever had. And I realized how much more I enjoyed Sonoma than Thunderhill. Thunderhill was great. It was a cool track, but it was so hot out there, and it was far from the house. It was a long way away. It was a lot of overhead. Had to stay at the hotel overnight, really, to make the day work. Sonoma, I could drive to and from. I'd be there in a half hour, 45 minutes from my house. It was perfect. So the school worked really well for me. I went through their programs, PD 1, 2, and 3, and I caught the bug, right? It was really in there. And while I was at the school looking around in their garage, I see this, like what I would say is a real looking race car. It was a Formula 3 car, and I'd never been that close to a proper open wheel car before in my life. I'd seen pictures, but they all kind of looked the same to me. So I'm looking at this thing, and one of the instructors comes over and says, "Oh, you're going to race Formula 3?" I said, "Oh, I'm not even interested in racing. Like, what is that thing?" They said, "Well, it's a Formula 3 car. It's made by a company called Lola. It was the 2007 Formula 3 spec and modified to be a school car. And we run those here and have this program called School of Racing." I said, "Well, I wouldn't even fit in that car." And the instructor said to me, "Get in." So I folded my body to get myself in this car that felt like I was effectively wearing the thing. You slide into this tube, you're lying down, and they said as long as my head cleared the roll hoop, I was good to go. And sure enough, even with my helmet on, there was some room. So that was my first time in a Formula car. And at which point I said, I think I'm going to sign up for this school of racing. So I did. The School of Racing started in December of 2016. So at this point, I'm not even 5 months into having been to the racetrack for the first time in my life, and now I'm learning how to drive a Formula 3 car. And I just didn't really have any context on what that was. Now that I know, it's sort of insane. You'd put a brand newbie into a Formula 3 car, this car that has 300 horsepower, it's all manual everything, on slick tires. I'd never done anything like this in my life, and here they are throwing me off the deep end. So I show up for the first day of school in December 2016, and it's just pouring down rain. It is a not happy day out in Northern California. And it turned out that we were supposed to be a group of 4 students all learning Formula 3 that day, but nobody else showed up because the rain was so bad they all canceled or whatever else happened. So I was the only guy. And I got personalized one-on-one training for my first day in a Formula 3 car with a really, really, what should I say, a really demanding instructor who let me know that he was not going to cut any breaks for me, even though I was new. He was going to give me the hard experience. But what a great couple of days it was. It rained almost the whole time. I got to learn the dynamics of this car a little. They put me out on intermediate tires, so I got a little bit of a sense of what this thing was about. We did a skid pad. We did some car control exercises. I went away from this thing just lit up in a way that the street car did for me, but this is like an order of magnitude more. And I knew I had to do more of this in my life. So at that point, I went back and signed up for the School of Racing parts 2 and 3. And I took the rest of that and got through and got out the other end. I graduated from this class and was ready to go try to drive a Formula 3 car at a track day.
No, it seemed pretty crazy that the motorsport bug bit you so hard. And I mean, even in the beginning, you were just kind of throwing yourself in the deep end and learning by trial by fire. I mean, having the difficulties of blowing the side of a curb and destroying your, shock tower. So going from that experience and then being willing to come back and getting a faster, more powerful car and then having the complications there, but still not being scared away and actually going and wanting more and taking those proper steps of, okay, maybe I could learn a thing or two from someone else that has a little bit more experience, and then jumping into that school environment, which I think is so cool. Like, I think schools and places that we can learn how to properly drive, nowadays they're few and far between, right? I mean, so many people get into these track day groups and stuff like that, and they're self-anointed experts, or they're watching things on the internet or listening to podcasts about motorsports. But for the most part, they're self-educating themselves, and they don't have that proper facility to go to where you're dealing with professional drivers, professional instructors. They're going to tell you the correct answers, right? I mean, at some point within the motorsport sphere, there is right and wrong answers. Now, there's some gray zones, right, that we get to play with, and that's kind of the art aspect of driving on track, but there's certain fundamental basics to learn. And so it was awesome to see you go through that platform, which then, of course, they upsold you on, oh, you think street cars are fast? Try a race car. And then at that point, they just gave you the double dose and you're in for the long haul.
I got the bug bad, and I didn't even tell you how bad. So it was the end of the summer in 2016 where I started doing these PD classes, the performance driving coming to Sonoma Raceway. I quit my job because I wanted to go deep with racing. I thought I'd take a little time off and really immerse in this world that I knew nothing about, but it was so addictive. I felt that passion so early on. I literally quit my job without a plan. And I thought, well, I could always come back or find something else to do. And it was that time where, it seemed like a good idea. So I did that. Now, in retrospect, I call that period my racing sabbatical. Because the thing I didn't realize is, the old saying, if you want to make a small fortune in racing, start with a large one.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't start with a large one, and I was burning through cash. So it became very apparent that I was going to have this sabbatical end when I had to go back to work because I wanted to race more and I needed the money to pay for it all.
I think a lot of us find ourselves in that position of working to get to the next track day, to spend the money and go back to work again.
It was exactly like that. So by the time I found the Formula 3 stuff, I was just like a kid in a candy store. I went back and I started watching all these old historical Formula One races that I didn't know anything about and I heard people talking about. I started keeping up with the active Formula One season, Formula Two, Formula Three, whatever I could find. I got really into some of these more esoteric series because that's what I could find online. I really enjoyed the Formula 3.5 Renault V8. I don't know
Oh
if you remember
yeah.
that. Formula Renault. It was Formula Renault 3.5 V8.
It was like a spec formula series.
It was a
Everyone
spec
was in
form.
the same thing.
Yeah, and one of the weird things about it is when they'd run the race, there was very little commentary at all because they wanted you to hear the sound of the engines because it sounded so good.
See, like that's the way I want a racing broadcast to be. I think at some point everyone just needs to shut up and we need to listen to the cars. NASCAR even does it sometimes. They call it crank it up. It's the crank it up segment and they just crank up the volume on the cars. But yeah, that's awesome. It's really cool to see how you jumping into motorsports for the first time. Obviously, your exposure was with open wheel cars, right? Some people get more attracted to the GT stuff because they're like, oh, I grew up and I loved Porsches, Ferraris, whatever else. And I like seeing those on a racetrack and those as race cars. But it's interesting to see that your exposure, what you got exposed to was the formula side of stuff. And you kind of just went headfirst into that category.
Yeah, I was fully primed for this GT path, right? I had just started driving this GT3 street car at the racetrack and having a blast, really enjoying it, thinking like, wow, where is this going to go? I hadn't thought anything about proper race cars. I was thinking about using my street car at the track like a lot of people do. And I didn't realize there was a step beyond that I would be interested in taking, but that's where this went. So I got into this Formula 3 car, and this thing was very different than what I was used to driving. Let's be clear. It was analog city, right? Everything about this car was analog. It was no power steering, manual brakes, no traction control, barely a computer on the thing. It was a sequential manual shifter with a wooden shift knob, like old school. And getting in this thing to learn the dynamics of downforce and aero cars that I had really no idea about, where they would tell you, if you want more traction, go faster. It was so counterintuitive. It didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, if I go faster, how am I going to have more grip? I don't understand. And so learning the dynamics of that, going through this school of racing and coming out the other end with a real passion for this sort of car and this style of racing that I really knew nothing about just a few months before. So it was a real transformation for me and something I needed more of. So the school offered track days for a small group of people who'd been through their programs, and they allowed you to rent the Formula 3 car to use for the track days. So I started to do that, and I'd go hang out with my buddies and the people I met through the school who had been doing Formula 3 for a while and had been participating in the Sim Raceway Sonoma F3 Club Racing Series. And this had been going on for a few years where the school would operate this club racing series in the summer and in the winter, and they would get, 8, 10, 12 guys out there in the school cars. A few of them had actually bought their own cars, and they're out there racing on the weekends. And I kept hearing about this at these track days, but I'm like, I don't feel that competitive. I don't really need to go out there and race. I'm really enjoying these track days. I just think I'm going to stick with that for a while. But I'd started hearing these stories from my friends, and they were having such a blast, and all these war stories and things that happen and intricacies of the car and the dynamics of what happens when you're wheel to wheel. And it really got to me. And a little bit of FOMO, right? I was just missing out on what all my buddies were doing. But I decided, okay, maybe I'll go ahead and try this racing thing. It'll be fun. I just want to finish a race. I'm not out there to take a trophy or try to win something. I don't feel that burn inside me to go compete and show I'm better than some other dude. I'm just going to go drive. So the summer series in 2017 was my entry into Formula 3 racing. So this all happened very quickly. Not even a year before this was the first time I was ever at a racetrack in my life. And I'm about to race in a Formula 3 car. And these cars, they're 1,150 pounds. They're barely anything there. You're wearing the car. They're so fast. The G-forces are so high. I wasn't in great shape. I was a pretty big dude. I'm trying to figure this stuff out. I'm sweating. It's a lot of work to be in these cars. First race, I felt like I was going to get heat stroke. By the end, I was so red, people thought something was wrong with me. They brought these cold towels over to me to cool me off after the race. But I finished. I finished last, but I finished. And that's what I wanted to do. I set out to achieve this goal, and I felt great about it. So I wanted to come back and do it again, but I knew I had to get more in shape and have a different game plan. I should tell you about the format of the race weekends because they were a little grueling. And when I think about it now, I'm like, wow, I really jumped into the deep end on this thing. A race weekend was 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So already you have to blow off work on Friday or whatever your commitments are to go be part of this series. So that was the level at which people were doing this, were taking it that seriously. So you show up on Friday, and in the morning there's 2 practice sessions. Then we break for lunch. Then there's qualifying, which was the normal qualifying format, right? All the drivers go out on track and everybody's trying to put down their fast lap within I think it was a 15-minute qualifying. And then after that, we'd go and have a race. And it was a 25-minute sprint race around Sonoma Raceway. So by the end of the first day, 2 practice sessions, qualifying, a race. It was still warm. It was the summer. I was done. I was spent. I was like, how am I going to continue to do this? And there's 2 more days of this. So the same thing, come back Saturday, do it again, go home bruised and hurting, and get up Sunday morning and pry myself out of bed. But the thing was, I was so excited. It was like jumping out of bed slowly and then getting myself back to the racetrack and getting through on day 3. So it was a really exciting way to jump headfirst into doing this stuff. And it took a lot out of me, but it was like those bruises you get from working out or doing something that's really fulfilling, and you hurt, but it's a good hurt, So in the beginning, that's how that was. I really enjoyed the experience.
It's so cool that the school also offered an internal series. I don't think people realize that used to be a lot more popular back in the day, that all of these schools around the country, these racing schools, would put on their own spec series. And so you had this very controlled environment in which you could slowly get yourself into wheel to wheel racing. It was, to my knowledge, managed or overlooked by instructors. So there's always these people that you get to, reference off of, is this right? Is it wrong? If we have an incident on track, or if I try to take this pass or someone took a pass on me, there's always those people that you can talk with to be like, yeah, this was good, or no, that wasn't a great decision. And it's so awesome that that was your experience, that you were able to find something like that and have a really educational exposure that was good for your development and good to get into racing. So many other people nowadays, when they're getting into racing, they don't have that knowledge. There isn't that step ladder anymore to get into racing. It's, you do track days and all of a sudden you get signed off for a license or do a school over the weekend and you're just straight into racing. And I think that's most people's experience, where they're not going through a controlled environment with instructors, with education, with all this information. They're just figuring it out along the way. And that's why in club racing, you might see some spectacular crashes or a little bit more contact than normal, which maybe there was contact in the Sim Raceway F3 series. We'll get into that a little bit next. But out there in club racing, there's people that just have no idea how to overtake or developing that racecraft. And I guess racecraft is mainly what I'm talking about when you're in wheel-to-wheel racing. That's that additional education that you go through, is how to operate around other vehicles. If you're on the inside of a corner, how can you still maximize the corner without that ideal line? So that's so cool that that was available to you in that. And it's a tight-knit group of people, and seems super, super special. It's unfortunate that it doesn't exist anymore, or at least here at Sonoma Raceway with Sim Raceway. But tell me a little bit more about the racing. So as you started getting better, moving maybe up through the field, getting more wheel-to-wheel, side-to-side action, what was that like? Was it sketchy? Was there incidents? Was it fun? All the above?
Yeah, it was coming together. I really appreciated how the school put on these events. Even just the regular track days, there were always instructors around there to give you feedback. The layout of Sonoma is such that your instructor can see you almost all around the track if they set up in the right place. So we get this feedback constantly, same during the race weekend. And I'm kind of a nerd, so going to school for the way to learn something like this made total sense to me, and it felt like a really educational experience. I go through my first race, I learned a ton. I came back for the next race, and I said, okay, so I want to finish the race and have fun, but I'd really like to not be last this time. That would be my next goal. So I set out that goal, and I had an off in the chicane in turn 9. So for those who aren't aware, at Sonoma, there's multiple configurations of the track. And for formula cars, very frequently, they run this little dogleg chicane at turn 9 versus what they call the classic or fast 9 config. And it's a high-speed braking and a quick turn and another quick turn, and then you're back on gas. Well, I did this poorly a few times, and I locked up my front tires. So you see a big puff of smoke, and I kind of go off into the dirt, and I get back on the track and lick my wounds and keep driving. So I've done this a few times now, but what happens is, and I am only just learning this, when you flat spot a tire, a slick tire, you effectively square it off a little bit. So your perfectly round tire now has kind of a squared off edge. And what'll happen is next time you want to come into especially a high-speed braking area, the tire's going to catch in the same place. So that flat spot that I created got worse and worse and worse as this race was continuing on. And it was 2 laps before the end of the race, and I was just coming around, and I see they throw the white flag, which is like, hey, last lap. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'm on my last lap. And I'm hearing this sound, and I can't figure out what it is at first, but I realize it's my tire. My tire is starting to delaminate. Now, I'd heard that term before, but I never knew what that meant. But literally, the top layer of the tire is coming off of the carcass. It's starting to create a rubber flap over the seams underneath, and it's starting to hit itself. Every time the tire comes around, the tire's like slapping against itself. And then this delaminated area got a little bigger to the point where now it was actually slapping the bodywork every time it went around. But I only had a lap to go. And I said, by all accounts, I should probably just pull over. I have a disabled car here at this point. But I'm like, no, I'm going to finish. So I went all the way around a full lap, because this was right around start finish. I started having this problem. And I made it all the way back around, but the car took a bit of a beating by the time I had gotten there. There are all these rubber marks all over the bodywork. The tire was a mess. It looked like it exploded effectively, but it got me home. So literally to this day, I still have that tire. I kept that as a trophy of my own failure, but my own success in a way. And the tire's a little harder and crustier these days, but every once in a while I'll go into the shop and see, and it reminds me of that really good time where persistence paid off, but it was also persistence at something that didn't matter so much, but had gotten under my skin. I made it matter a lot. And there's a lot of that in racing.
Yeah, dealing with adversity. And I was talking about, the battles you have with other people, but also at the end of the day, sometimes you have to battle the car,
Yeah.
right? Like as a driver, as a racer, you're not always given a perfect vehicle that's going to work and operate exactly how you want it. And even if it's understeering or really snappy and oversteer or just doesn't have this balance or the tires are burned off, you still have to deal with it, right? As a driver, you don't just get to give up, which once again at club racing, yes, you can give up, and what are you losing at the end of the day other than a plastic trophy? But that's not the point. Once you get in that racer mindset, it's do or die. All you want to see is that checkered flag and finish the race. Even if you're not given a perfect car, you always want to drive the car to how fast it is. If you're given a 5th place car, you want to finish in 5th. If you're given a car that can go for the win, you want to be on that top step of the podium. So really fun experiences of getting into this and really starting to see all the different dynamics of racing very early on, I would say, in your career.
Yeah, at first I was definitely competing with myself. I wanted to finish a race. I wanted to survive it. I wanted to get a little better as I went. Then I started having that burn, that feeling like, oh, I don't want to be last anymore. Maybe I could be faster than some other people. I wasn't even yet at racecraft and overtaking or anything like that. That's just go out there, drive faster than some other person. And little by little, that evolution continued, and it got me to the point where now I wanted to compete. Now I want to go out there, and these are the same guys I go do track days with. I want to go out there and be faster than them during the race. I want to have an opportunity to overtake somebody, build my skills while I'm doing it and feel comfortable doing that. Passing at speed is really intimidating the first couple of times you do it. You don't know how close you can get to another car. These cars don't have brake lights or anything. You have to trust that the person in front of you is going to do the expected and consistent thing every time they go into a braking zone, for example. So developing that trust took a lot of time, and it helped that these were people I was going out on track with repeatedly. Another benefit of the club format, you get to know your fellow racers, you get to know their style and what they do, and you have an ability to build that trust, to be close to that car and try that overtake. So little by little, I started creeping up the order, and it was going better. I was learning how to drive the car better. I was having better success in quali. And at one point, I came out for a race weekend feeling really good about things. And, I went out to quali, and it was, day one, and it was pretty good. I was in the middle of the pack. I was feeling good about myself. So day 2 comes around, and get out there to qualify again. And coming down turn 2 at Sonoma, I go into the compression at turn 3, which is like this bowl in the track where there's a dip down and a hard left turn 90 degrees up the hill, which is followed immediately by a blind right-hand turn. So I went into this area, and I went up the hill, and I went over the right-hand blind turn, and I spun. I just didn't have control of the car, and it spun me around, and I was facing perpendicularly to the track. but now my car started rolling backward, and I'm perpendicular to the racetrack during quali. I didn't have the presence of mind or experience to know this was a really bad place to be. I was in harm's way, and it was getting worse as I started rolling backward with the car more toward where the racing line was, on the other side of that blind crest. Well, I keep trying to refire the car and hit start and start it up and try to get in the right gear so the car would start. And another thing about these race cars is sometimes they don't crank right up the first time you want to start them. They're hard to get engaged. It's hard to find the friction zone to get the clutch in the right place so you can get rolling. And here I am rolling backward now down across the track the wrong way, facing perpendicular to it. So as I'm doing this, I realize time is of the essence. I need to get going again. And I hear another car approaching. I can hear it coming from around up the hill, and I know badness is coming my way. By this time, the turn worker had thrown the yellow, so there's a caution flag out. So I'm hoping, okay, great, everybody's going to see that I'm disabled. I put my hand up in the air because that's the thing to do, like to get visibility in a little low-slung formula car where people can't see you. If there's something wrong and you need attention, you put your hand up in the air and wave. And so I did that. The turn worker saw me. I thought, okay, cool. He threw the yellow flag. We're okay now. But I hear this car coming, and it's coming at speed. This is quali. Everybody's out there to race their fastest laps. And up comes car number one, let's call it, over the blind crest, is coming pretty much straight at me. And at the very last second, was able to sort of change direction and just swerve around me and continue on. And at this point had slowed because he realized the yellow flag was out there. But it was such a close call. I just saw like my whole life fly in front of my face. It was impossible to just be calm during this period. Well, I'm still in the same spot, and I'm still trying to refire the car to get out of this position that I know is really precarious and was proven by the guy who almost just hit me. And here's the sound of another car coming. And this guy sounds like he's coming hard. He hasn't seen the yellow flag, or he was somehow blind to it. And he came up over the blind crest, and all I could do was sort of brace for impact at this point. I saw him coming with a split second before he arrived there. And the next thing I knew, crash. He T-boned me at speed, coming down the blind crest at, probably high double-digit speed in a formula car, and got me right smack into the side of the car, sitting there perpendicular to it. Well, we both carry that speed a fair distance, and it was really fortunate that there was so much attention paid to safety in this school, in this series, and in particular, the equipment that was used. These Formula 3 cars, these Lola chassis, were carbon fiber monocoque chassis. They were extremely light and extremely strong, so they could undergo incredibly high force without doing anything to the driver inside. It was also beneficial that I was wearing a Hans device. At this point, a Hans was not mandatory for a track day. And it's not even that long ago, really, but it's hard to imagine now this thing that we take for granted. It's like wearing your seatbelt in the car. When I grew up back in the 70s and 80s, that was a thing, like a lot of people just didn't do it. Nowadays you get a ticket, right, if you don't wear your seatbelt. So the Hans was an optional thing. Fortunately, I had the presence of mind and the sense to wear one. So I wore one with our 6-point harnesses. And when the crash happened, there was a huge amount of energy that was created between the car hitting me and my car. And it was a really fortunate thing that I wasn't up against a wall when I had stopped. We were out in the middle of the track, so all that energy dissipation happened in the two of our cars smashing into each other and then moving, carrying those two cars together across the track into the dirt. We both were stunned, but were able to get up out of our cars out of harm's way and really with no problem to show for it. I had a little bit of a bruise in my shoulder for a few days, but other than that, we both walked away from this incident. It was incredible to me. It sort of proved to me the capability and the engineering behind the equipment we were using, how much care was being taken to make sure people were safe out there. And even in the worst circumstances I could think of, we both walked away from the incident. So it was a real learning experience. First off, if you spin and you're on the racetrack, the first and foremost thing you need to do is get the heck out of the way. And if you're on a part of the racetrack that's offline, you're a lot better off than having the car roll onto an area where you're now online and you're closer into the path where another car is coming. So it wasn't my favorite experience ever. When I think back to it, it was pretty traumatic, but I didn't want to let it end my passion that I had just really started to develop for doing this activity. So that occurred on a Saturday, and the school had scheduled these track days, all throughout the calendar when you can come in and use a car. So I came back on Monday to the racetrack because I wanted to get back on the horse. I didn't want to have that doom in my mind. Every time I drive past turn 3A, I remember the incident. And it's always this place I always, think about every time I'm out there. I really wanted to kind of clear my head and go and do it. And it was the best decision I made was to get back out on the track. It wasn't in a Formula 3 car. It was just in my street car. But it gave me the confidence to know that I could drive this corner. The dynamics of what happened were limited to the fact that it was qualifying. We had a few less experienced drivers who didn't know or weren't closely paying attention to the flags that were out on track, not knowing how to mind ourselves, not knowing how to recover from a spin or from an incident. And it helped re-cement the passion for me that momentarily was shaken by this really bad crash that had occurred.
Experiencing your first incident on track, and I feel like a lot of people go through this, unfortunately, when you're first getting into track driving and especially racing, at some point, something's going to happen. I mean, you're doing a dangerous activity, you're on the edge, you're going fast, you're around other people. There's so many variables that go into it. At some point, some incident is going to occur. And it sounds like your first incident, I mean, obviously we had the mechanical issues of the first two streetcars, but, not a big crash or a crash. I wouldn't categorize those as crashes. But for your first incident, your first crash, it sounded like it was a pretty big one.
It was gnarly.
And pretty traumatic to an extent of big impact and a lot of damage. And my question is, you kind of touched upon how you were able to get yourself out of that, but like, what is that mental process like? Losing, a lot of confidence, I can definitely imagine that, and trying to rebuild that back up. And I think it'd be beneficial for other people that may have gone through that similar sort of experience of how do you get back on the horse? You say you want to get back super, super early and really quickly, but like, what was that mental process between Saturday and Monday like?
Yeah, I'm pretty critical and I can be hard on myself. And so my first and initial reaction was to feel bad for what happened. Like it was my own fault or I contributed in some way. Yeah, the other driver should have seen the yellow flag and should have known to try to swerve around me, but I shouldn't have been where I was. It was a product of my own mistake. I felt bad for messing up the event, right? Qualification was over at that point. There was no more quality because of this huge incident, and the 15-minute period was over. So the best lap you had at that point for everybody else racing, that's what they got. So I went away from this thinking, I messed up. I gave everybody else a bad time. There's now one fewer car available to this group of people who want to use it until they fix it, if they can fix it. It took some time for me to realize, and probably the best thing about this was all my friends and the instructors in the club and the school came over and told me, this is why the equipment is made the way it is. This is an activity where we take risks, calculated risks, but we're out there trying to find a limit, and sometimes we find the other side of it. And this is part of the learning process. And these cars are made for incidents and crashes. And it didn't occur to me previously that the design of these cars is such that they know these things are going to go wrong sometimes. They're designed so that they can be put back together quickly and as easily as possible. So if there is such a failure, the mechanics can go take that car and repair it and get it back into service. So it took hearing those things, having a very supportive group of people around me, and having that experience of hearing what you did, we've done before. We've had other people do things like this. Maybe not that exact incident. It sounded like this was a pretty bad one for the school. But they'd been through things before such that they knew how to calm me down, talk me down, help me understand what happened wasn't so exceptional. I wasn't the only person that ever did anything like this. I'm not going to be the last. And frankly, and it sounds bad to people who are less familiar with the space, but if you haven't crashed in racing yet, I'm a little worried because you're going to at some point. And there's that day that just hasn't occurred yet that will occur. And in some people, there's a false confidence because they just have never pushed so hard to the limit to find where that was. I've done track days with people who claimed, I've never spun at the track. I said, well, are you even driving there? Because the whole exercise is in finding the limit and occasionally going past it in a way that's safe and a place that's safe and learning how to recover when things go badly. And so this was sort of my experience in learning, like, you're going to crash. You hope to have it be as minimal as possible. You hope to walk away from it and learn a lot from it and then get back at doing it. And so having that support from my instructors and my friends was really helpful. My wife was super supportive and told me to go back out there and try it again and not to let this get me down. And that really helped a lot. So getting back out to the racetrack, confronting the place where I had this moment, this failure of myself, accepting the fact that it's a thing that happens. This is the mindset of racing that I feel like teaches us a lot about life. I feel like a better person because I've had to experience heartache. I've had to experience failure. I've had to experience trying something as hard as I can try and not being good enough yet because I have skills to develop or experiences to gain. And that's all come from racing. And it was this incident and others like it that were never quite so high impact or traumatic. But, times where the car didn't do what you expected to do, or I didn't do the right thing with the car, such that things go wrong. And it gave me a totally different mindset about this activity. And it maybe redoubled my interest. I wanted to go back in and do it again the right way and learn from this and go and be good and recognize this is something that happens.
It's so interesting because within racing and just like in life, you have to fail to learn. Human beings, and the way that we absorb information and can learn, will learn more and quicker by failing. If we do everything right all the time, you really don't know what that limit is like, right? If
Yeah.
you play with the limit, if you lose control of the car a little bit, you're learning something. You're learning car control. You're learning where the limit is. You're learning where you can push. If you're always underneath the limit and just scared to like exceed what the car is capable of, you're not learning anything about the car. You're driving smoothly, you're driving safely, you're driving within the limit, but you're not learning those outer bounds. And in racing, yeah, big mistakes happen, and even pro drivers make mistakes. That's part of the sport of pushing the limits. Is things can go wrong, whether that's our error, the vehicle's error. Most of the time, it's the human, right? I mean, people love to try to blame the car that there was a mechanical issue or something happened with the car. Most of the times, it's you, and I think that's a big piece of whenever you do have an incident, is understanding. Be critical to a degree, be analytical about the situation, learn what occurred. What can you do differently next time? Even when I've had wheel to wheel or body to body contact in racing, you always look at that situation of what could I have done different? Not blaming the other person, not blaming the circumstances, but was there something I could have done different to minimize an incident like that occurring? Even if you get blown into at turn 11, which is the sharp hairpin here at Sonoma, even if someone blows their braking zone and gets into you in turn 11, could you have been more aware? Could you have seen that car coming at a higher rate of speed? Could you have opened up your entry, let that car go by, and not have your car get impacted? Just because something happens to you doesn't mean you don't have a choice. You still have that free will to understand the situation, understand if that person on the inside of you is going to push you off the track on the exit of the corner or not. And do you have an escape plan? Can you get out of a situation if you need to? Once again, things like that happening helps us learn. And you're not going to know, you're not going to gain the knowledge until that happens to you.
Yeah, it's a little trial by fire, right? Sometimes you don't know what you don't know until it happens, and then you learn from that and you get to move on. Sometimes maybe you've had a teacher or an instructor who was overly nice, that gave great feedback all the time, was a little afraid to like burst people's bubble and tell them something critical. And you can't learn as well, in my experience, I don't learn as well from people like that. I need somebody who's going to kind of give me the reality, tell me the reality, give me direction, tell me what I need to do differently, and I will try to apply that feedback the best I could. The other thing about mindset that really helped me here is I had a lot of friends with more experience doing track days than me, and these instructors were kind of reinforcing this message that driving a street car is not driving a race car. If you've been driving a street car for 10 or 20 years of your life, that doesn't make you a better race car driver than somebody who's a brand new driver. You really need to learn the dynamics of racing, not of driving on the freeway or whatever it is. So I came in with beginner's mind. I came in with as little ego as I possibly could about this activity, knowing that I had a lot to learn, knowing that I was starting fairly late in my life. I was well into my 40s by the time I started doing this activity. So I wanted to go in and get better, and I wanted to get better in a hurry. And I knew it was expensive to be out there, so I wanted to make the most of my time. So anytime I got feedback from an instructor, from a more experienced or senior driver, I tried to apply it. I didn't try to bat it away or say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. There's those moments where we feel like taken down if somebody says you didn't do that right and you think you did it right and you want to argue the point. But really early on, I said, look, I was probably the person in the wrong here. What could I have done differently? How could I have made that evasive maneuver to avoid that impact? How could I have read the situation differently, given myself some margin in a way that I could have come back from that? So that was That was huge. That was instrumental in me getting back at this activity and continuing to do it and allowing me to progress and continue to get better.
Now, finishing on maybe a lighter note, transitioning away from the incidents and learning by trial by fire and learning by mistakes, talk about when you started moving through the field, getting into maybe mid pack, front pack, but mainly dealing with racing close against someone. You're now your ability levels are now getting more and more equal to your competitors. You're spending more time around other cars, having to find a way to overtake. Developing that racecraft is what we always talk about, is the racecraft. The ability to make those decisions, analyze the situation. What was that development like for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was gaining confidence in my own ability to smash that brake pedal and get quick braking and get off of it and get going again. Doing that close to other cars in a way that I knew I could repeat, and watching my friends and my fellow club members repeat on their own gave me confidence in and trust in the fact that they're going to do it that way also. Then there's the matter of being close to each other at speed and knowing that these cars are relatively equal spec. So if we're trying to drag race down the straightaway, as much straightaway as we have here from turn 6 to turn 7 at Sonoma Raceway, one of you is going to have to give or is going to have to brake later or something, because one car is not going to be able to overtake the other car if you started with the same amount of energy. If you got on the gas at the same time and started driving together, you're going to stay neck and neck the whole way. So it's understanding and learning the dynamics of the cars and the people I was driving with that really helped give me more confidence, to the point where I could go and try that first pass. I saw an opportunity well in advance. This isn't something that you suddenly realize you can pass most of the time. It's something you need to set up 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 corners in advance. You see the guy driving ahead of you. He seems like he's a little slower coming into this turn than you think you are. You think there's an opportunity to try to get around him coming up to or in that area. You have to plan it out. It's strategic. And the first time I was able to pull that off, it felt like hitting a home run in baseball, or getting 100 on your test, or whatever that achievement is that you're trying to gain in your life. It felt like such a success because I did it cleanly. Nobody hit anybody else. I was now in front of that other car. And the dynamics of these cars, of course, in open wheel cars on slick tires do not like to touch other tires. Or should I say, if a tire touches another tire, it ends badly. One car kind of goes up and over the other one. So we learned pretty quickly, you don't want to get so close. Rubbing is racing is not said in Formula racing by and large, because when the tires strike each other, usually bad things happen.
That's why I like GT cars. We get to rub on each other a little bit more.
Yeah, it's close racing for sure in GT cars. Stock cars, those things are really close to each other, bodywork coming together. In the Formula cars, and especially in the school environment, we were encouraged very strongly, just don't touch. There are times, you can bang your wheels together side by side under the right conditions and you won't have a bad moment of it, but the dynamics need to be exactly right. So
I wouldn't try it.
I wouldn't want to do it.
The window's
either.
very small to be able to contact 2 Formula cars, or you just have to be more precise in a Formula car.
That's right. And so it got to the point where I could make an overtake cleanly. I could find the opportunity for when to do that and have it work well and execute the overtake properly. Then there's those opportunistic times where I remember one time in a race coming down the carousel, which is turn 6 downhill, left-hander onto the straightaway at Sonoma up to turn 7 uphill, realizing that we're taking the hairpin configuration. That is, when you get to turn 7, instead of veering left, which they call classic, you go straight and you kind of make a 180 to turn back the other way on the track, coming back from turn 7. We were running that configuration, and I realized the 2 guys ahead of me who were closely battling, and I was right behind, were staying way track left of the turn, the apex coming up to make that hairpin around turn 7. Now, ideally, you give yourself a little bit of width, because coming around the hairpin, you need turning radius. And that's another thing about these Formula cars is they don't turn really well. You need to be moving at speed to get the car to rotate to turn. If you're coming in too slow, you'll completely miss the turn. But I saw these other cars were set up way outside of the turn where they needed to be. So I sort of snuck in and was able to get my nose ahead of 1.5 cars effectively by the time we got to that apex. And I was able to overtake 2 cars in a single turn. It took some planning, but it also took some reactivity from me to realize there was that opportunity. And, when I went back and looked at the footage, it looks a little sketchy, but a totally legal move, just one that the margin for error there was even less. And fortunately, it all went off without a hitch. And we were able to kind of clear that hairpin and continue on down into the S's. So building confidence in passing and overtaking and being near the other car at speed was an incremental process. It took a lot of experience and a lot of practice and a lot of being out there with people who seem consistent and like, they're not crazy. They're not going to suddenly do some weird maneuver that we haven't seen before because they value their life too. They want to come home too. They want to go do this again tomorrow.
Yeah, that was a good example of one of those situations, kind of like you were talking about, where the opportunity presents itself in a moment. And over time, over seat time and doing races over and over again, it's almost like flipping up flashcards of this looks like a passing opportunity or it doesn't, right? And it only
Yeah.
is seat time and experience and over again to be like, oh, I could have overtook there, or even reviewing footage and seeing the situation present itself. That way, when you're behind the wheel, and you're doing everything that you need to do to drive the car fast subconsciously at this point, and now you're able to consciously think about the situations that are presented in front of you. But that was a great example of one of those opportunities where someone's making, a misjudgment of some kind, or, maybe focused on something else and leaving the door open, so to say. And it's up to you in that moment to quickly make that decision. Now, Sonoma, in its tendencies, a lot of people come here and they think, where the hell do I pass? There's not a lot of passing opportunities.
Right.
There are a lot of passing opportunities at Sonoma, but the way that you need to execute them, just like you were saying, you have to position yourself 3, 4 corners before and let the thing kind of play itself out and then hopefully present its opportunity a handful of corners later. Where other racetracks, it's pretty easy to just get a better exit than the other guy. And by the end of the straightaway, you're able to present yourself in the inside of the next corner and make a pass happen. Where here at Sonoma, you're very much right, where you got to be thinking, turn 4 about your overtake into the braking zone of turn 7 and how you can position someone offset or try to make them cover up maybe a potential passing opportunity into the carousel, which then is going to give you a better run on the exit of turn 6 and into 7. It's all about this positioning and this play of momentum. And I mean, for you to be jumping into this and thinking about overtakes and passing and how to set up a pass at Sonoma, if you can overtake at Sonoma, you can pass anyone at any other track. It's just going to be so much easier. Sonoma is just one of those tricky tracks, and that's why it's special.
Yeah, this is that high-speed chess I think we talked about in a
Oh,
previous
yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
Sonoma also is being called a technical track. There's a lot to do. You're busy. There isn't that long straightaway where the 1 mile an hour difference between the jump you got from the exit of the last turn onto the straightaway is going to make up enough difference over time that there's an opportunity for a pass. So being strategic, looking for those opportunities, planning for them, but also being able to take advantage of one if suddenly an opportunity arises. That's all the dynamics of this. And man, it really lit me up doing this kind of stuff. I felt like I was so smart. I really took advantage of an opportunity that was there. It was a good move. It was a clean move. At first I was like, oh, was that safe? Was that okay? Was that legal? I had to go back to my instructor and be like, hey, was that okay what I did? I want to make sure I didn't do the wrong thing. We're a club. We want to be buddies. But at the same time, I want to win and I want to take advantage of the door that was open for me. So I did, and it went well, fortunately.
Yeah, it's always weighing that risk versus reward analysis, which is always going on in your head as a driver of presented a situation. Do I take that big risk for the reward of gaining a position, or is the risk so great that maybe we'll come together? Maybe this guy's not going to see me if I make that overtake, or if I dive to the inside and I'm too far to the inside and he's not able to visually see me there and is going to turn down on me. It's all these things we weigh, and it's getting my juices going right now thinking about like overtaking at Sonoma. This is my favorite place to race just because of those chess moves that you can place. I mean, this is playing chess on difficult. Like you have to be very calculated about your moves, positioning your car just right, and making everything fall into place to get around someone. And no, it's cool to see that development of you getting into racing and really picked it up super, super quick of the time it took for you to do your first track day, to find a great community and environment, to grow that passion, that interest, to take it from I'm new to driving street cars on track to now I want to be new driving race cars on track to new into racing to now I'm developing the skill sets and that know-how to analyze a situation, make an overtake happen, do a race cleanly, potentially get on the podium? I mean, did we start winning some races in this series towards the end?
Yeah, well, over time, I got from behind, the last car in the pack to being faster than a couple other people to the point where I got a third place finish. I got a second place finish, and eventually I won a race. And it felt like such a triumph that coming from nowhere, I didn't even know this is a thing I wanted to do. I didn't know what that is. I didn't know how to go about it, to the point where I feel like I was excelling at this thing alongside my peers and friends, and some of whom had way more experience doing this than me. It was a good day for me, or I put it down well that day, or whatever it was. I put my wheels in the right place and it all worked out really well. There's a lot of things that aren't completely in your control. And another thing I realized about this activity was how fortunate I was to find this group, this school, to be able to take the time to go do it. But also there's a fair bit of luck involved. It's one of those things like when there's a dynamic you have maybe among a group of friends, and you hang out together and you have a good time, and then it sort of goes away. You go away from school, your whatever circumstances, or you're at a job and you have this group of people you hang out with, and then it's over. And afterwards, you're like, that was a really special time. That group dynamic that we had was awesome. And I really wish there was some way to realize it while it was going on, because most of the time we don't realize it until afterwards. And somehow doing this activity, having had failures and successes alongside friends and instructors, and being there together doing this, I realized while it was happening, this is a special thing. Feel good about it, realize what you got and how good that is. And so little by little, those few wins became several wins. And in 2018, the winter series that they ran, it was a 6-race series that ran between December and February. So mostly rain races hit Sonoma, which is a hard place to race in the rain. I won the series. I came away first place in points. I was winning in qualification, coming in P1 pole position. It felt so good to have, achieved these things, to have created a little bit of mastery. I wouldn't say I'm a master at, but have developed these skills and be able to put them down and use them under different circumstances and come away with the race win. And yeah, at the end of the day, we got a little metal plaque that said first place on it. They gave us a hat. It was cool to wear the Pirelli hat that said first. You get up on the podium. We sprayed the champagne. It was a good time. I really enjoyed all that. But that was all secondary to the experience that we had, the time we had hanging out with friends, the time and feeling like I got better at a thing that I put my own energy into. I tried at this thing, maybe in a way I hadn't even tried at anything else in my life. Sometimes if things come easy, like maybe you're good at math in school, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're good at science in school, or there's this activity that you figure out that like, hey, I'm pretty good at this. I don't need to try that hard. You coast pretty far. This is something coming into, I could tell, was really difficult. There was very little intuition involved, a lot of things I had to break habits to learn. So the effect of achievement here felt like it was even somehow more valuable than all those other things that I had done where maybe it was a little bit of an easier path along the way. And other than having to go back to work and balance now the passion for driving on the track and how to find the ability to do a good job and like keep my job, because that's my livelihood and paying for all this stuff. And getting back to the track as soon as possible, finding a way to take that business trip and get some time while I'm whatever place I am to get on the racetrack there, to find a car, all of that stuff came up and lit me up. So by the time I had won that series, I felt like I'd really achieved something, and I kept at it. So after the winter series, the next series in 2018, the summer series that followed, it went really well. And the first couple of races out of the gate, I was on pole position for both races. I won both races. I came through feeling like a hero. I felt like I am the best at this among this group of people doing it at this place. What I didn't realize was I got really good at racing a Formula 3 car in this group of people at Sonoma Raceway. That's not absolutely applicable to every other circumstance of driving a different kind of car, driving in a different kind of series, driving at a different place. But there is a lot about the applicability of Sonoma to other places, so that held. But I got to this point where I said, well, what do I do next? I really want to go take this Formula 3 thing further. So I explored the options, and I found there's this series called FIA F3 Americas, which is the feeder series that, F4, F3, F2, F1. A lot of young people coming up, learning from karting into lightweight formula cars or open wheel cars, were climbing this ladder. And there was an opportunity for me to go join this series to do the FIA F3 series in the US. But it was a different kind of car, right? I've been driving this 2007 Lola chassis car, and the car that they were using for the FIA series was a Ligier with a Honda engine. And I had to go try one out. I had never been in one. It was about the same spec, but turned out when I went to get in the car, I wouldn't fit. So, I mean, the F3 series went away and I didn't find a way to get into another F3 series. I accept that that was something that I did. I still love the cars. They're a fantastic platform. If I went to go do it all over again, I would do it exactly the same way if I could. I would squeeze myself into one of those Ligier F3 cars if I could possibly fit. But it's something I highly recommend to people. Sometimes you think something sounds so far and away from your own level of ability or achievement that you wouldn't even try it. But a lot of the people I know, the people we hang with, you play the game on hard. You want to try
Right.
something, you set yourself up in a way to make it a little bit more difficult than maybe it could be because you want to achieve at that level. You want to get better. You want to demonstrate and have that feeling of progression, right? And so trying to reach for something that seems even away from your grasp is really what this is about. And I loved F3. I still love it. I can't get enough of it. I've turned a bunch of other people onto it. I've put on some track days. Our club has put on track days where we've had the opportunity to get instructors and put on clinics to get other drivers capable and competent in F3 cars, teaching them the dynamics of driving on slick tires, driving with downforce, learning how to actually operate a car that's all manual, everything, and there's no electronics or nannies doing anything for you. That's been super rewarding, and I can't wait to see what comes next.
Yeah, I think your story is awesome for people looking to get into the sport of don't be afraid to take that next step. We kind of talked about it in our episodes of going to your first track day and then making that jump of getting into racing, but just don't be afraid of making that additional step. I think there's so much more to get out of this sport, this activity when you make that jump into a race car or something like that. And you're a testament of how you can move quickly through those things given the right environment.
That's right.
You were able to find that school environment which gave you so much information and so much education. I encourage other people to do the same, whether it's finding an instructor, private instructor, or an organization that has instructors. But if you're looking to progress through driving and driving at the track and potentially get into racing, and that's what you want to do, really emphasize that educational piece of it. I understand we all want to go to the track, we just want to rip laps and look cool and go fast. But if you really want to squeeze everything out of it and enter that flow state and explore some other elements to this activity, invest in the educational piece of it. Whether it's there's a school in your local area that you're able to join a series or something like that that's controlled and you're able to have instructors around you or an organization or whatever it is. But find that ability to go back to school in a sense and have fun in that learning atmosphere because driving isn't just the feel and isn't just, oh, figure it out on your own. There is information that people can give you to help elevate that experience. So don't be afraid of one, making the jump, but ensure that you have that proper community, you have the proper resources around you. That way, when you make those jumps and you continue to have your journey forward, it's an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, you're investing in yourself, much like we talked about in the track cars are stupid and so you want to go to the track and so you want to go racing episodes. Bolting something onto your car to try to make it a little faster may or may not even work. And if it does work, it's only on that single car. But if you invest in yourself and the education of how to drive at speed, how to develop those skills, that's something you can take away and bring to any platform and any car and any place you go drive. And elsewhere in your life, right? These sort of things I'm talking about, I'm not trying to make a bigger thing out of this than it is. Literally, this is a life-changing activity. And if you go out there and maybe it's not for everybody, but if you go out there and you think it's something you want to do, invest in your own education, learn from the people who've come before you and stand on the shoulders of giants, right? There's an opportunity here to gain so much knowledge and information from other people, but you need to take that step for yourself. It's not going to come automatically, and it's not something you can go buy off the shelf.
Well, this has been awesome. It's been great to hear your story of how you quickly transitioned of wanting to drive cars fast and then quickly get into the racing and learning about the racing school series and all that stuff. It's been really insightful, and hopefully the listeners enjoy the information and are able to put it into practice. And we'll have more people out there on track and share some fun competition.
Yeah, I hope people get motivated from this. I could talk about it all day. I'm so passionate about it. I love it. It just lights me up. And I know for a lot of other people who maybe haven't tried it yet, it'll do that for you too. So give it a shot. And thanks for hearing my story.
And F3s weren't the end for you. So I think next time when we get an opportunity to get back to a checkered past, we'll get to hear how you elevated yourself, not necessarily changing the number in the car that you were driving, but changing around some of those letters, going from an F3 to an LMP3. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into that next time and talk about what sort of stories came from your LMP3 career.
Oh man, I can't wait to tell you about those.
Well, thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Sylas.
This has been Cold Start. Thanks for listening.